Seller closing costs credit. What is it and how does it work? If this is your first time at the channel, my name's Amanda. I'm happy you're here. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and tap that bell for notifications so that you'll be the first to know when I upload a video each and every week. I'm super excited to talk to you today about what is a seller closing cost credit, because we are finally starting to see that come back into our market, at least here in Northern Virginia. So what exactly is a seller closing cost credit? First, I want to make sure that I mention you may also hear it referred to as a seller concession. Same thing, the terms can be used interchangeably. So what is it? What a seller closing cost credit is when you as the buyer are looking to get some assistance to pay towards your closing costs, or maybe all of your closing costs. So let me give you an example. If you're purchasing a home that's, say, $500,000 and you really want to get $10,000 in a seller closing cost credit, to the sellers, that is a net of $490,000. And it's important to point that out because when seeking a seller closing cost credit, the sellers have to agree. Even though when you are getting a closing cost credit, your loan amount will be based off of a $500,000 purchase price as noted in the example. So you're actually financing your closing costs. So the seller has to agree and your lender has to agree. There's also another option when you are looking to get a seller closing cost credit, and that is offering above list price for the home that you're interested in and then building the closing costs in. So going back to our $500,000 example, you could offer $510,000 and then ask for $10,000 in a closing cost credit from the seller, which would then of course net to them $500,000, their list price. There is a disadvantage to that though, and I'm going to cover that a little bit later in the video. But I just want to give you the two examples of how closing cost credits from the seller can work. You're probably wondering just how common are closing cost credits, and the answer is it really depends on the market. Last year, I could not get a closing cost credit if my life depended on it, but the market has cooled down a little bit here in Northern Virginia. Nothing crazy, but a little bit. So I did some research before making this video, and in the last 30 days, out of all the homes that have sold in Fairfax County, only about 20% of them had a seller credit. So not terribly frequent, but it still is coming into the market a little bit more than what we've seen in the past couple years, which were definitely just an anomaly and not typical. They are not unheard of, but it depends on whether or not you can get one, depends on how much competition there is for the house and ultimately what the sellers are willing to do. Are there any disadvantages to asking for a seller credit? The answer is yes, there are. The first disadvantage of asking for a seller credit is the house still has to appraise for the sale price. So let's go back to our $500,000 example. If you offer $510,000 and you ask for $10,000 in closing cost assistance from the sellers, that house still has to appraise at $510,000. So depending on what the comps are as agents, we really have to dig into those numbers to see if there could be an appraisal issue down the road. Because if you come to terms at the $510,000 and then the house doesn't appraise, well, someone is going to, or maybe both the buyer and the seller are going to have to find some common ground to not only make the seller credit work or maybe go away depending on the circumstances, but also then meet whatever the house appraised for in terms of fixing the shortage that it didn't meet with the $510,000 sale price. A disadvantage in our sellers' minds could be that the house technically does close for the net price. So at $500,000 and $10,000 in closing costs coming from their side, that really is $490,000 to them. And sometimes that doesn't sit well with sellers. It takes an in-depth conversation and every situation is different. You know, if the house just came on the market and it has a lot of interest and you're expecting multiple offers, you might want to hold off on catering to one that is asking for closing assistance. That's where our expertise as agents really comes in. We've got to drill down and have those hard conversations with our sellers to be able to give them the information they need to make the best decision for them. In the event of multiple offers, asking for a seller closing cost credit could put a big disadvantage on your buyer's offer. It depends on how much competition there is, but a lot of times what will happen, because a house has to appraise for beyond the sale price, even if there aren't a ton of offers, if there are 3 or 4 offers, the odds of the house going for at least list price, probably slightly over, are pretty high. So even if you're structuring this contract for your clients to build in the closing cost, that house still has to appraise. So if you have offer A that's just a straight $500,000, or offer B is your client's and it's 510 and asking for 10 back in closing, if all other terms are exactly the same, then offer A is stronger because the house only has to appraise for 500 instead of 510. So how do you get sellers to agree to closing cost for your buyers? Talk to the listing agent. Your job is to find out what is important to their seller. Maybe it's a certain closing date and they don't mind giving some closing costs to meet that closing date that they want. Maybe there's something else that they're looking for in terms of a rent back or a void-only home inspection. Every seller is looking for something different, and it doesn't come down to price for every single seller. It's just not the case. Most are always focused on price, but there are some that it just doesn't matter. So you've got to find out, have a conversation with the listing agent, make an effort to build a rapport with them and to find out what's important to their clients. And do not ask, whatever you do not start out by asking, will your seller agree to X amount in a seller closing cost credit? That's not enough information for that agent to go back to their client with. You need to paint the big picture, determine what your buyers are willing to do, and then take that to the listing agent. Last up, is there a cap on how much a seller can contribute to a buyer's closing costs? And the answer is yes, but this question can't be answered specifically because it depends on what type of loan the purchaser is going with. So depending on whether it's conventional, FHA, VA, will then depend on how much of a closing cost credit they can actually receive at closing. The other thing to keep in mind is, unless it's a VA loan, purchasers cannot walk with any money at the closing table. So let's say that the sellers agreed to a $10,000 seller contribution and all in buyer's closing costs were $9,000. You've got $1,000 left that you have to figure out how to use. Maybe an HOA due can be paid in advance, or condo dues can be paid in advance. There are some workarounds, but bottom line, yes, closing costs are capped in terms of how much the seller can contribute. If you have questions about how a seller closing cost credit works, drop me a comment below. I'll be happy to answer it for you. I hope you got some value from today's video, and if you did, please consider giving me a like or hitting that subscribe button. I would greatly appreciate it. Until next week, I hope you all take care. Thanks for tuning in.